Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
In 2008, I was going through a messy divorce and needed a place to live with my 3 kids. Finding a decent rental during that chaos wasn't easy, but I got lucky. I found this great 5-bedroom house, 3,200 square feet for $1,600 a month. It was perfect because it was big enough for all of us and close to the kids' schools. The landlord was this sweet old guy who never gave me any trouble. He was retired and seemed happy to have a reliable tenant who took care of his property. Since I'm pretty handy with tools and repairs, I'd fix things myself instead of bothering him. Over the years, he never raised the rent, which was amazing. The $1,600 stayed the same for 16 years. Even though I was renting, this place became my home. I made some upgrades to make life easier for me and the kids. I installed smart switches and outlets, put in a small backyard pond with some goldfish, built a tool shed, added closet organizers, and even put in a dog door when we got our puppy. Nothing crazy, just practical stuff that made the house work better for us. The landlord always gave me permission for everything, and I kept all the original parts just in case. By 2024, my kids had moved out and it was just me in this big house. I was thinking about maybe buying my own place eventually, but I wasn't in any rush. The rent was still cheap and I was comfortable. Then everything changed. In February, I got a call that my landlord had passed away. I felt terrible. He was such a nice man. About a week later, his son contacted me. He wanted to inspect the property, which was his right as the new owner. The inspection did not go well. This guy was nothing like his father. He kept trying to open my dresser drawers and look through my personal stuff. When I told him he couldn't do that, he got all pissy with me. I explained that he had the right to inspect the condition of the house, but he couldn't search through my private belongings because that was illegal. He argued back that he was the owner now and could look at whatever he wanted. I told him that wasn't how the law worked. He could inspect for damage or maintenance issues, but going through my personal things was not allowed. He got this nasty look on his face but finally backed off. When he was leaving, he handed me a notice. My rent was going up to $4,000 a month, effective immediately. That was almost $1,000 over what similar houses were renting for in the area. Look, I would have been willing to pay a reasonable increase. I knew $1,600 was way below market rate after all these years. But $4,000 was just greedy. I pulled out my lease and read it carefully. The month-to-month agreement clearly said that rent increases required 3 months' notice. I called him up and told him I'd gotten his notice about the rent increase, but according to our lease, he needed to give 3 months' notice for any rent changes. He brushed me off and said the lease didn't matter because he was the new owner. I explained that the lease absolutely mattered because it was a legal contract. I told him he needed to give proper notice, and I needed to give him notice too. I was moving out at the end of the 3-month period. A few days later, someone knocked on my door. It was a process server with an eviction notice. This guy was trying to kick me out with cause, claiming I had made unauthorized modifications to the house. His main example was the dog door I had installed in the back door. I was furious but not worried. I still had the original door in my garage, and I had text messages from his father giving me permission to install the dog door. This was neither unauthorized nor permanent. We ended up in court. The judge listened to both sides, and even though I had proof that the modifications were authorized, he decided I needed to move out within 30 days or face eviction. But here's the important part. He specifically ordered that all modifications must be restored to the original condition. The landlord seemed smug and told me I had to move out and couldn't take anything with me, while the judge corrected him, explaining that the order was clear. All modifications must be restored to original condition. That meant, if I had added something, it needed to be removed to restore the property to how it was before. I smiled. This was going to be fun. Over the next month, I got to work. I removed every single smart switch and outlet I had installed, replacing them with the basic ones that were there originally. I drained and filled in the backyard pond. I sold the tool shed to someone who came and hauled it away on a flatbed truck. All the closet organizers came out. The garage storage systems were removed. I even replaced the newer appliances I had bought with basic models from the thrift store. The dog door, I put the original door back on, just like the judge ordered. When I moved out, the house looked exactly like it did when I moved in 16 years earlier. Actually, it looked worse because everything was now outdated. 2 weeks later, I got served with another lawsuit. He was suing me for removing his property. His lawyer was claiming that anything I had added to the house became part of the property permanently and that removing it was theft. My lawyer just smiled when I showed him the paperwork. He asked if I had the judge's order from the eviction case, and I showed him the document that clearly said all modifications must be restored to the original condition. Then he asked if I had receipts proving I purchased and installed everything I removed. I told him I had every single receipt because I keep detailed records for tax purposes since I'm self-employed. We went to court, and it was beautiful. The landlord's lawyer tried to argue that I had stolen his client's property. My lawyer presented the judge's order requiring me to remove all modifications along with receipts proving I had purchased and installed everything myself. The judge seemed confused and asked the lawyer if he was telling the court that his client sued to have modifications removed, got a court order requiring their removal, and now he was suing because they were removed as ordered. The landlord's lawyer tried to argue that the law says improvements become part of the property, but the judge cut him off. He explained that the law also says that court orders must be followed, and I was ordered to restore all modifications to original condition. That's exactly what I did. He dismissed the case and ordered that the landlord pay all my legal fees. I walked out of there feeling pretty good. A few months later, I got a call from someone who said she was his sister. Apparently, some of my mail was still being delivered to the old house, and she wanted to make sure I got it. We started talking, and she apologized for how her brother had treated me. She said they had no idea what he was doing. I asked what she meant, and she explained that the house wasn't just his. All four of them had inherited it together. He told his siblings it had a reverse mortgage and was worth less than what was owed on it. He said they wouldn't get anything from selling it. I told her that couldn't be right. The house was paid off years ago and had to be worth at least $700,000. She said they knew that now. He had already made a deal with one of those big rental companies to buy it. He was planning to keep all the money and tell them there was nothing left after paying off the fake debt. She explained that the rental company's offer was based on all the improvements I had made to the house. When they came to finalize the purchase and saw that the smart home features, storage systems, and everything else was gone, they lowered their offer significantly. They threatened to sue him for misrepresenting the property. Since all four siblings were listed as owners on the deed, they all got named in the lawsuit. That's when the other three found out their brother had been lying to them about everything. She told me they took him to court themselves. They had two choices: press fraud charges against him or make him give up his share of the inheritance. I asked what they decided, and she said he gave up his share. The house sold for $550,000, and the three of them split it evenly. He got nothing. So in the end, this greedy guy's plan to screw me over and steal from his own family completely backfired. He lost his inheritance, had to pay my legal fees, and ended up with a house that was worth way less than he thought because he forced me to remove all the improvements that made it valuable. I started volunteering for this nonprofit in 2000 when I was fresh out of college, just wanting to give back to the community. Over the years, I helped them with everything: their website, their fundraising events, setting up their computer systems, you name it. All for free because I believed in what they were doing. By 2019, I had my own successful consulting business. I specialized in information technology, web design, and digital marketing. I was doing well for myself, not mansion rich, but comfortable enough that I didn't have to stress about money. My wife and I had just welcomed our first child, and life was good. That's when the nonprofit came to me with a problem. Their full-time coordinator had quit suddenly, and they were scrambling. They begged me to step in temporarily while they found a replacement. I asked them how long we were talking about. The board president told me it would just be a few months, 3 at most. They really needed someone who knew their operations inside and out. I agreed to help out at $25 an hour Canadian. It was way below my normal consulting rates, but these were people I'd worked with for almost 20 years. I figured I could sacrifice a bit to help them through a rough patch. 3 months turned into 6. 6 turned into a year. Then 15 months had passed, and they still hadn't hired anyone permanent. Every time I brought it up, they had excuses. The board president kept telling me they were still interviewing candidates and that the right person would come along soon. Meanwhile, I was working full-time hours, 40 hours a week minimum, often more. I was handling their television bingo fundraiser, managing their website, doing their bookkeeping, handling human resources issues, marketing, operations, basically running the entire organization. And I wasn't billing them for any of it because I kept thinking it was temporary. When my son was born, my wife went back to work after her maternity leave. We put our baby in daycare so I could continue helping the nonprofit during what I thought was their time of need. I was losing money every day I worked for them instead of my regular clients, but I stuck with it because I believed they'd find someone soon. Finally, after 15 months, they started pressuring me for an invoice. The treasurer told me they needed me to bill them for my time because the accountant was asking questions about why they had no payroll records for their coordinator position. I sat down and calculated what I was owed. 40 hours a week for 15 months at $25 an hour came to just over $60,000 Canadian. I sent them the invoice. The response was explosive. The board president called my invoice outrageous and said there was no way I had worked those hours. I told them I had worked every hour I billed for and more, and that I could provide detailed records if they needed them. Then one of the board members, who I'll call Karen, accused me of lying about my hours. She said I was a new father whose wife had just gone back to work, so I couldn't possibly have worked full-time hours. She assumed I must have been home with my baby. I explained that we had our son in daycare and that I'd been working full-time just like any other employee would. Karen then made a snide comment about how now I knew what it was like to work an actual job like the rest of them. The condescension in her voice was unbelievable. Here I was, someone who had given them nearly 2 decades of free work, and they were treating me like I was trying to scam them. The board president then complained that they were upset I wasn't volunteering my time anymore like I used to. I explained that I was still volunteering. The hours I billed were only for the television bingo coordinator work. All my other activities like website maintenance, marketing help, and technical support, I've been doing for free like always. They didn't believe me. The meeting got heated. Karen dismissed my concerns about my reduced hourly rate, saying they didn't care that I had cut my normal rates. The treasurer then made a proposal. If I insisted on billing them, I needed to charge my full professional rates for everything I did, but then deduct 10 hours a week for volunteer work. 10 hours a week was more volunteering than any of them had ever done in their entire time with the organization. But I told them that if that's how they wanted to structure this, I could do that. I went home and completely restructured my billing system. Instead of $25 an hour for everything, I now charged my real consulting rates. $40 an hour for basic administrative work, $65 for bookkeeping and operations, $85 for information technology work, and $125 for specialized web development and marketing strategy. I started tracking every single minute I spent on their organization, answered an email about the bingo, billed fixed their printer, billed updated their website, billed at premium rates, had a phone call about scheduling, billed. Then, exactly when they requested, I deducted 10 hours per week for volunteer time. My first invoice under the new system was for 50 hours of work after the volunteer deduction. At my mixed rates, it came to about $3,000 for 1 week. They'd gone from owing me about $1,000 a week to $3,000. The board meeting where I presented this was priceless. The board president said the invoice couldn't be right and that it was way more than before. I explained that this was exactly what they had asked for, full professional rates for all work, minus 10 hours per week of volunteer time. Karen accused me of fraud and said I was stealing from them. I reminded them that I had detailed logs of every task and every minute spent, and that they had asked me to bill this way. I was billing exactly when requested. They couldn't argue with the logic because it was literally what they had demanded, but they kept doubling down on their accusations. Since they wanted to treat this like a real business relationship instead of the volunteer situation it had been, I decided to act like a real business. I started hiring additional staff on their budget, people to handle some of the basic tasks I'd been doing alone. This meant I could reduce my own hours while maintaining the same level of service for them. Over the next year and a half, they continued to accuse me of incompetence and fraud at every board meeting. They questioned every invoice, demanded explanations for every line item, and generally made working with them miserable. But I didn't need their money or their approval anymore. They killed my passion for volunteering with them, so now it was just a job. Karen would regularly claim that I was padding my hours and overcharging for simple tasks. I would respond that every hour was documented with specific tasks and timestamps, and that if they wanted to audit my records, they were welcome to hire an independent accountant. They never took me up on that offer. During those 30 months of working for them, something interesting happened with their fundraising. The television bingo program I was running brought in about $30 million gross revenue, with $20 million in net proceeds for their programs. To put that in perspective, they'd raised less money in the 100 years before I started coordinating than they raised in those 2.5 years. But instead of being grateful, they became more hostile. Every success seemed to make them angrier, like they couldn't stand that someone they were treating poorly was also making them successful. Finally, I'd had enough. I'd hired and trained a solid team to handle the operations, and I was confident they could succeed without me. I submitted my resignation. The board president protested that I couldn't just abandon them like this. I reminded them that I was giving 30 days notice and had trained their entire staff, so they'd be fine. Karen called my departure unprofessional and complained that they had trusted me and I was leaving them high and dry. The irony was incredible. They'd spent 2 years accusing me of fraud and incompetence, but now they were upset that I was leaving. I walked away and never looked back. I'd learned that no good deed goes unpunished, especially when you're dealing with people who feel entitled to your time and expertise. They got exactly what they asked for, professional rates for professional work, and then complained about the cost. 6 months after I left, I heard through mutual contacts that their fundraising had dropped back to pre-2019 levels. Turns out running a successful operation actually requires the skills they've been getting at a massive discount. They ended up hiring 3 different people to replace me at a combined salary higher than what they'd been paying me even at my premium rates. I moved into my apartment complex 3 months ago after finally landing a decent job at a local tech company. The place wasn't fancy, but it was affordable and came with assigned parking spots, which was a huge deal for me since I've been dealing with street parking nightmares at my old place. When I signed the lease, the landlord specifically showed me my parking spot and gave me a little placard with my apartment number to hang from my rearview mirror. Everything was going fine until last week when I came home from work around 6 p.m. and found a beat-up sedan parked in my spot. I figured it was just a mistake, so I parked in a visitor spot and left a polite note on the windshield explaining that this was my assigned space and asking them to move their car. The next day, the same car was there again. This time I was annoyed because I had to park 2 blocks away on the street. I left another note, less polite this time, and went up to my apartment. Around 10 p.m. I heard someone yelling outside. I looked out my window and saw a woman with bleached blonde hair screaming at my car, which I'd managed to squeeze into a visitor spot. The day after that, I decided to wait by my car to catch whoever was parking there. Sure enough, around 5:30 p.m., the sedan pulled up and this woman got out. She was probably in her 30s, wearing a tank top and ripped jeans. I approached her politely and explained that she was parking in my assigned spot. She immediately got defensive and claimed that the spot had been hers for 2 years. I told her I had just moved in 3 months ago and that this spot came with my lease, offering to show her the paperwork as proof. She completely dismissed my paperwork and said she didn't care what any stupid document said. She said she'd been parking there since before I even lived in what she called this dump. I tried to de-escalate by suggesting we check with the landlord to figure things out. She refused to check with anyone and declared that this was her spot. She threatened me, saying I better move my piece of junk car or there would be problems. I stayed calm and pulled out my phone to show her the email from the landlord with my parking assignment clearly stated. Even when I showed her the official email proving that spot 23B was assigned to my apartment, she accused me of making fake emails on my computer. At this point, her boyfriend came walking up. He was a tall, skinny guy with tattoos covering his arms and neck piercings. He looked like he hadn't showered in days. He asked what was going on, and she immediately told him I was trying to steal their parking spot with fake paperwork. The boyfriend turned to me and suggested they needed to teach me a lesson about respecting other people's property. I corrected him, explaining that this wasn't their property and that I pay rent for this spot just like I pay rent for my apartment. He took this as me calling his girlfriend a liar and stepped closer. I could smell alcohol on his breath when he got in my face. He told me that documentation didn't mean anything around here because they were there first. I said I was going to call the landlord right then to settle this, but she warned me not to call anyone and that they would handle this themselves. I decided this was getting too heated and walked away to call my landlord. When I explained the situation, he confirmed that spot 23B was definitely mine and said he'd send them a letter if needed. I went back outside to tell them what the landlord said, but they were already gone. The next morning I found my car keyed all down the side and both side mirrors broken off. I was furious but decided to install a small dashboard camera before things got worse. I also reported the vandalism to the apartment management. That evening, they were back in my spot again. This time I just parked elsewhere and waited to see what would happen. Around midnight I heard voices outside and saw them both standing next to my car with what looked like glass bottles. I grabbed my phone and started recording from my window. I heard her say that this should teach me not to mess with them. Her boyfriend agreed, saying something about how I'd like walking to work after they were done. That's when I realized what they were planning to do. The boyfriend lit something and threw it at my car. It was a Molotov cocktail, and flames immediately spread across my hood. She threw another one that hit my windshield. I immediately called 911 while still recording. The fire department and police arrived within minutes. By the time they put out the fire, my car was completely destroyed. But I had everything on video, and it turned out the apartment complex had security cameras that caught the whole thing too. When the police arrested them, she started screaming about how this was all my fault and that I was trying to steal their parking spot. Her boyfriend tried to run but didn't get very far. The officer told her that the parking spot was assigned to me according to my lease agreement. She said that was impossible because they've been parking there forever. The officer then told her that according to the apartment manager, neither of them even lived in the complex and that they'd been trespassing and illegally using the parking spot. It turns out they had been living in a motel down the street and just decided to use the apartment complex parking because it was free. They'd been doing it for months before I moved in, and the previous tenant in my apartment didn't have a car. The boyfriend was charged with arson, destruction of property, and trespassing. She got hit with the same charges plus additional counts for the vandalism earlier in the week, which the security cameras had also caught. Since the boyfriend had prior arrests for assault and drug possession, he was looking at serious jail time. My insurance covered most of my car's value since I had comprehensive coverage, and I was able to get a rental while shopping for a replacement. The apartment complex also upgraded their security and started actually enforcing the parking assignments. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. Both of them had pleaded guilty to avoid trial. The boyfriend got 18 months in county jail, and she got 8 months plus community service. They also had to pay restitution for my car and the damage to the apartment complex property. I ended up buying a better car with the insurance money, and now I park in my assigned spot every day without any problems. Sometimes I see other residents who heard about what happened, and they always make sure to point out that parking spot 23B belongs to the guy whose car got firebombed by crazy people. I've been married to my husband for 8 years now, and we've had our share of ups and downs. We both work full-time jobs, me as a nurse at a local hospital, and him as an accountant at a mid-sized firm. Between our demanding schedules, keeping up with our small two-bedroom house has always been a challenge, but we've managed to find a routine that works for us. My husband's family is incredibly close-knit, but not in a warm, supportive way. They're the type of close where everyone knows everyone's business, and they're not shy about sharing their opinions about it. His mother has strong feelings about how I keep house. His sister always has something to say about our grocery choices, and his brother loves to comment on our financial decisions. My husband usually brushes off their comments, but I can tell they affect him more than he admits. Last Friday started like any other day. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital, dealing with back-to-back emergencies and barely having time to grab a sandwich for lunch. All I wanted was to come home, maybe order some takeout, and collapse on the couch with my husband. I was looking forward to our usual Friday night routine of watching a movie and unwinding from the week. I walked through the front door around 7:30 p.m., kicked off my shoes, and noticed my husband pacing around the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in that overly cheerful voice he uses when he's talking to his family. I heard him agreeing with his mother that it sounded great and telling her they'd see everyone around 8 o'clock. My stomach dropped. I stood there in my scrubs, still smelling like disinfectant, watching him hang up the phone with a big smile on his face. I asked him to please tell me he didn't just invite his family over tonight. He greeted me cheerfully and confirmed that his mom had called saying they were all free, so he thought it would be nice to have everyone over for dinner. I looked around our living room. There were dirty dishes on the coffee table from breakfast, a pile of laundry on the armchair that I'd been meaning to fold, and magazines scattered everywhere. Our kitchen was in even worse shape, with a sink full of dishes and barely any food in the fridge. I pointed out that the house was a mess and we didn't have any food, asking if his whole family was really coming over in 30 minutes. He brushed off my concern, saying it didn't matter because they didn't care about that stuff and just wanted to spend time with us. I knew he was lying, and he knew it too. His family cared about that stuff. His mother had made passive-aggressive comments about our housekeeping before, and his sister once brought cleaning supplies as a housewarming gift 2 years after we'd moved in. I asked what he was planning to serve them for dinner, since we only had leftover pizza from 2 days ago and some crackers. He said we'd figure something out and maybe order a few pizzas, then told me not to be so uptight about it. I felt my frustration building. After a long day of work, the last thing I wanted was to scramble around trying to make our house presentable for his judgmental family. I explained that I wasn't being uptight, I was being realistic. I told him his mother would walk in and comment on the dust. His sister would ask why we didn't have appetizers, and his brother would make jokes about us living like college students. He dismissed my concerns, saying I was being dramatic and that they weren't that bad. 20 minutes later, I was frantically shoving dirty laundry into our bedroom closet when the doorbell rang. My husband answered it, and I could hear the familiar voices of his family filling our small entryway. His mother commented that it was quite warm and asked if we didn't run the air conditioning. His sister mentioned she'd brought wine but didn't see any cheese or crackers out, offering to help set something up. His brother complimented our place, calling it very lived in with a smirk. I emerged from the bedroom, still in my work scrubs because I hadn't had time to change, and tried to put on a pleasant face. I greeted everyone and apologized, explaining that I'd just gotten home from work and hadn't had a chance to get things ready. His mother seemed surprised that I'd worked that day, commenting that she thought nurses had more reasonable schedules. His sister added that they could have brought food if they'd known we weren't prepared. The evening continued in this vein for the next 3 hours. I ended up ordering pizza for everyone while trying to clean up around our guests. My husband sat on the couch chatting with his family like nothing was wrong, occasionally throwing me grateful looks when I brought out drinks or napkins. After they left, I was exhausted and frustrated. My husband seemed confused by my mood, saying he thought it went well and everyone had a good time. I asked him what he'd been planning to have for dinner tonight if they hadn't come over. He said he didn't know, then added that he guessed it was good they weren't coming over anymore since I didn't want them there. I'd spent my evening scrambling to be a good hostess after working a 12-hour shift, and now he was acting like I was the problem. I told him I never said I didn't want them there, I just needed more than 30 minutes notice when he invited people for dinner. I explained we didn't have food, the house wasn't clean, and I'd just gotten home from work. He complained that I was always difficult about this stuff and asked why I couldn't just go with the flow. He said other wives didn't make such a big deal about having family over. I pointed out that other wives probably got more than 30 minutes notice and reminded him that I'd told him before I just needed a couple days to prepare, which wasn't unreasonable. He called me uptight and uncooperative, claiming his family thought I didn't like them because I always seemed stressed when they came over. The next morning he was still sulking around the house giving me the silent treatment. I decided I'd had enough of this pattern. I called his mother. I told her I wanted to talk about the previous night. She seemed hesitant and asked what about it. I explained that I was sure she'd noticed we weren't prepared for company, and that was because her son had invited them over with 30 minutes notice while I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour hospital shift. She seemed flustered and started to say they just thought, but I cut her off. I told her that from now on, if they wanted to come over for dinner, I needed at least 2 days' notice to plan a proper meal and get the house ready for guests. I asked if she thought that was fair. She quickly agreed that it was reasonable. I said I'd let my husband know that she understood since he seemed to think I was being difficult for asking for basic courtesy. When I hung up, my husband was standing in the doorway looking sheepish. He asked if I'd called his mom. I confirmed I had and told him she agreed that asking for 2 days' notice was reasonable. I added that it was funny how she didn't think I was being uptight or uncooperative. He didn't have much to say after that. The next time his family wanted to visit, he called me at work first to check if the weekend worked for me. Their visits became much more enjoyable when I had time to prepare for them. I was 16 at the time, still living at home and going to the local secondary school. Our village was one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and the elderly made up most of the population. The younger families like ours were in the minority. Most days after school I'd help out around the house or do my homework. I wasn't the type to cause trouble or hang around in groups making noise like some of the other teenagers. That afternoon I'd just gotten home from school when my mom called out from the kitchen. She asked if I could pop down to the shop for her because we were almost out of milk and she needed it for dinner that night. I told her it was no problem. I grabbed some money from the kitchen counter and headed out. The village shop was only a 5-minute walk from our house, right in the center of the village. It was one of those old-fashioned places that sold a bit of everything, run by the same family for decades. Most of the villagers did their daily shopping there, and it was the hub for local gossip. When I pushed open the door, the little bell above it jingled like always. I could see the cashier behind the counter, a middle-aged woman who'd worked there for years. She was chatting with an older lady I recognized from around the village but didn't really know personally. The woman looked to be in her 70s, well-dressed with perfectly styled gray hair and a handbag clutched tightly in her hands. I headed straight for the refrigerated section at the back of the shop to get the milk. When I walked past them, I overheard bits of their conversation. The older woman was speaking quite loudly like some people do when they get worked up about something. The woman was complaining that the young people in this village had absolutely no respect anymore. She told the cashier that just yesterday she saw a group of them outside the post office, laughing and carrying on. They barely acknowledged her when she walked past. The cashier said that was unfortunate, but the older woman wasn't finished. She insisted it was more than unfortunate, it was disgraceful. She went on about how, when she was their age, they knew how to behave properly and understood respect for their elders. She declared that these children today were completely ruining the atmosphere of their lovely village. I grabbed a bottle of milk from the fridge and quietly made my way back toward the counter. The woman was still going on, getting more animated with each word. She complained that they walked around with those headphones in their ears, completely ignoring everyone around them. She said not to get her started on how they dressed, claiming they had no sense of decency whatsoever. She blamed their parents for clearly not teaching them any manners. The cashier tried to suggest that maybe some of them weren't so bad, but the older woman cut her off. She insisted there was no excuse for it, and that they were all the same. She called them rude, inconsiderate, and completely self-absorbed. She warned that they were going to be the downfall of this community. I stood quietly behind her, holding my milk and waiting for her to finish. The cashier had noticed me and was starting to look uncomfortable, looking between the woman and me. Her eyes kept darting in my direction like she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how to interrupt. The situation was becoming more awkward by the second, but I didn't know what to do. I've been taught not to interrupt adults when they were speaking, and I certainly wasn't going to start an argument with someone old enough to be my grandmother. So I just stood there, listening to her tear apart my entire generation. The woman continued her rant, saying they had no consideration for anyone but themselves. She told the cashier that just last week, one of them nearly knocked her over rushing past on the pavement and didn't even apologize. She asked if the cashier could believe such behavior. The cashier agreed that it really wasn't acceptable, while continuing to look nervously at me. I could tell she was getting more uncomfortable with the situation, probably realizing how unfair it was for me to have to stand there listening to this woman's complaints about people my age. The older woman added another complaint about how they never helped their elders. She asked if any of them offered to help when she was struggling with her shopping bags. She answered her own question, saying of course not, because they were too busy looking at those phones of theirs to notice anyone else existed. I shifted slightly the milk carton, making a small sound when it touched my jacket. Still, I remained silent. Part of me wanted to point out that she was making sweeping generalizations about people she didn't even know, but I couldn't bring myself to speak up. My upbringing had been too focused on respecting elders, and confrontation had never been my strong suit anyway. The woman finally seemed to be winding down her speech, having apparently exhausted her list of complaints about young people. She adjusted her handbag and prepared to leave, still completely unaware that one of the subjects of her criticism had been standing right behind her the entire time. She told the cashier that she should be getting home and thanked her for listening. She said it was nice to talk to someone who understood how things should be. She turned around to leave, and that's when she saw me standing there with my milk, having clearly been waiting patiently the whole time. Her face went through several expressions very quickly: surprise, realization, and then obvious embarrassment when she understood that I'd heard everything she'd just said. For a moment, we just looked at each other. The cashier watched nervously, probably wondering if this was going to turn into some kind of confrontation. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. The older woman stammered out an apology, saying she didn't mean me. She insisted I was clearly a good girl, and that she could tell I'd been raised properly. She was flustered now, her cheeks turning pink when she realized how her words must have sounded. She fumbled with her handbag, clearly wanting to escape the awkward situation she'd created for herself. She tried to explain that I was obviously one of the well-behaved ones, and that my parents should be proud. I simply thanked her, keeping my response polite even though I was thinking about all the other young people she'd just insulted who probably deserved the same courtesy she was now showing me. She hurried toward the door, moving faster than I'd seen any elderly person move before. Just before she left, she turned back and told me to have a lovely day. The door jingled when she practically fled the shop, leaving me alone with the cashier, who looked like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. The cashier apologized for what I had to listen to, saying that it wasn't fair to me. I told her it was okay and asked if I could just pay for the milk. When I walked home, I thought about what had just happened. The woman's quick change in attitude once she realized I'd been standing there showed that she knew her words were unfair. Maybe she'd think twice before making such broad generalizations about young people in the future. At least, I hoped she would. When I got home and told my mom what happened, she shook her head and said that some people need to learn that respect works both ways. I think she was right about that. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.